Do not follow them into Black Hollow, Grace. Nothing that cries from those woods is asking to be saved. The warning came from behind her, just as the smallest wolf pup disappeared beneath the ancient pines. Grace Miller stopped at the edge of the forbidden forest, her breath catching in the cold evening air. 20 minutes earlier, she had been standing beneath lanterns and silver pine packs crowded Gathering Square, trying to become invisible while people laughed about the rejected Omega, who still had no mate, no rank, and no important family name. Grace had learned to endure whispers. She had learned to lower her eyes when stronger wolves wanted an easy target. What she had never learned was how to ignore something helpless. That was why she had noticed the crying. 3 pups had been huddled beside an empty supply shed beyond the celebration, each small enough for Grace to carry. Their pale coats were muddy from travel, and their frightened eyes kept turning toward the dark tree line. "Where is your mother?" Grace had whispered. The largest pup immediately started toward the forest. The other 2 followed. Grace followed them nearly 50 yards before realizing where they were taking her. Black Hollow. Every child in Silver Pine knew the stories. Alpha King Alexander Hayes had forbidden entry years ago after unexplained disappearances began near the northern trails. Hunters spoke of enormous tracks appearing after storms. Shepherds claimed they had seen a white shape moving between trees. Alexander himself had searched Black Hollow repeatedly for the mysterious beast believed to live there, yet no hunting party had ever managed to corner it. Grace looked back toward the distant lights of Silver Pine. She could return. Someone else could handle this. Someone stronger. The smallest pup suddenly turned and hurried back to her. It caught the edge of her coat gently between its teeth and pulled once. Then it released her and whimpered. Grace's chest tightened. "You really want me to come with you, do you not?" The pup stared at her. Behind Grace, an older pack guard stood near the boundary marker, clearly unwilling to cross it. "Leave them," he called. "Those animals came from Black Hollow. They belong there." Grace looked at the 3 trembling pups. "They are scared. That forest is forbidden by order of the Alpha King." Another cry came from the smallest pup. Grace remembered the laughter at the gathering. Weak Omega. Too soft. Too trusting. People had always spoken about compassion as though it were a flaw she would eventually learn to overcome. She never had. Grace crouched and held out her hand. The smallest pup touched its nose to her fingers, then turned toward the forest again. "All right," she whispered. "Show me." The guard called after her, but Grace stepped across the weathered boundary stone. Immediately, the sounds of Silver Pine faded behind her. The forest smelled of wet cedar and winter moss. Moonlight slipped through branches nearly 80 feet overhead, leaving silver patches across the narrow trail. The pups moved quickly now, stopping every few yards to make sure she remained behind them. Grace followed for nearly half a mile before the trail disappeared completely. That was when she noticed the tracks. They were enormous, far larger than those of the 3 pups. Grace stopped. Her wolf, usually little more than a quiet presence inside her, suddenly became alert. The pups did not seem frightened by the tracks. They seemed comforted by them. A branch moved somewhere to Grace's left. She turned. Nothing. Then another sound came from behind her. Slow footsteps. Heavy, but careful. Grace's heartbeat quickened. She continued walking. Whatever moved through the trees followed at a distance. When the smallest pup stumbled over a fallen branch, a huge white shape flashed between 2 pines less than 30 feet away. Grace froze. The shape vanished instantly. The pup stood again and continued forward without fear. Grace stared into the darkness where the creature had disappeared. It was not stalking the pups. It was watching over them. And suddenly Grace understood something that made the forest feel entirely different. She had not followed 3 lost pups into Black Hollow. The 3 pups had come out of Black Hollow specifically to find someone willing to follow them back. Grace remained still until the white shape disappeared completely between the pines. Every sensible instinct told her to turn around, yet the 3 pups were already moving deeper into Black Hollow, pausing every few steps to look back at her. "You could make this easier by telling me where we are going," she whispered. The largest pup tilted its head, then continued forward. Despite herself, Grace smiled. The expression vanished when another branch shifted somewhere behind her. The unseen creature was still following. Grace walked faster. The forest changed as they descended into a narrow valley, the tall pines growing so close together that moonlight became thin silver ribbons overhead. moss-covered fallen logs, and a shallow creek wound beside the trail. The smallest pup stopped to drink. Grace crouched nearby, listening. No birds. No insects. Only water and the occasional soft movement beyond the trees. Her wolf stirred again. Not fear. Awareness. Grace looked toward the darkness. I know you are there. Nothing answered. She felt foolish until two pale eyes appeared between distant trunks. They were nearly 4 feet above the ground. Grace slowly stood. The eyes vanished. A moment later, the smallest pup slipped while crossing the creek and landed harmlessly in the shallow water. Before Grace could reach it, the enormous white shape appeared on the opposite bank. Grace froze. She saw only part of it before the shadows swallowed its outline again, but that was enough. A wolf. An impossibly large white wolf. The creature did not approach Grace. It watched the pup climb safely onto a rock, then retreated. Grace's fears shifted into confusion. A predator would have moved toward weakness. This creature had done the opposite. You were checking on them, she murmured. The pups continued upstream. Grace followed. Nearly a mile beyond the pack boundary, they reached a place where the creek divided around a cluster of black stones. The largest pup suddenly stopped. Its ears flattened. A faint sound traveled through the valley. Not a growl. A low, tired whimper. All 3 pups ran toward it. Grace hurried after them and entered a clearing surrounded by towering cedar trees. She stopped at the edge. Something large lay beneath an overhanging rock on the far side, mostly hidden in darkness. The pups rushed toward it, pressing themselves against the pale shape. Grace finally understood. Your mother. The creature lifted her head. Silver eyes found Grace immediately. She was enormous, larger than any wolf Grace had ever seen, with a white coat that almost glowed beneath the moonlight. Yet she did not rise. She seemed exhausted. Grace remained 20 feet away and slowly lowered herself to one knee. I brought them back, she said softly. The mother wolf watched her without hostility. One pup crossed the clearing and returned to Grace, tugging gently at her sleeve. What do you want me to do? The pup walked toward its mother. Grace hesitated, then followed. 15 feet. 10. 5. Her wolf became strangely calm. Up close, Grace noticed something beneath the mother wolf's fur near her shoulder. A faint silver marking, shaped almost like a royal crest. Grace had seen a similar symbol before, embroidered across the banners hanging in Silver Pine's gathering hall. The Hayes royal insignia. Her breath caught. Before she could look closer, a distant horn sounded beyond the valley. Then another answered from farther north. Search horns. Grace turned toward the trees. Torchlight flickered between the trunks nearly half a mile away. Someone had followed her into Black Hollow. The mother wolf struggled upright, placing herself between the approaching lights and her pups. Grace heard a man's voice carrying through the forest, deep and commanding. Spread out. She crossed the boundary less than an hour ago. Grace knew that voice. Everyone in Silver Pine did. Alpha King Alexander Hayes was coming. The mother wolf moved first. She stepped in front of the 3 pups, her enormous white frame forming a living wall between them and the approaching search party. Grace stayed beside the rock, watching the animal carefully. There was no aggression in her posture, only protection. They are not here for me, are they? Grace whispered. The mother wolf looked toward the torchlight. That answer was enough. Voices moved closer through the trees. Grace counted at least 6 guards. Alexander's voice came again, now less than 200 yards away. No one moves ahead alone. We find Miss Miller first. Grace blinked. He was searching for her. For one strange second, embarrassment almost replaced fear. She imagined returning to Silver Pine, surrounded by royal guards, while everyone learned that the rejected Omega had ignored the most famous law in the territory because 3 pups had looked sad. Then she looked at the mother wolf. The silver crest beneath her fur caught the moonlight again. This was larger than embarrassment. The smallest pup pressed against Grace's ankle. Stay close, she murmured. A branch snapped beyond the clearing. The mother wolf lowered herself protectively. Grace stepped forward before she could reconsider. Your Majesty. The forest went silent. Torchlight shifted toward her voice. Seconds later, Alexander Hayes emerged between the cedars with 4 royal guards behind him. He was taller than Grace remembered from public ceremonies, dressed in a dark field coat rather than royal formal wear. His expression controlled but unmistakably relieved when he saw her. Grace Miller. His eyes swept over her quickly. Are you hurt? No. Then come here. Grace did not move. Alexander's gaze shifted past her. The relief vanished. His entire body became still. The guards noticed next. One whispered, "The white beast." Grace turned toward the mother wolf. The animal had not moved toward them. She remained beside her pups. Alexander slowly raised one hand, signaling his guards to hold position. "Grace," he said, quieter now, "walk toward me. She has not threatened me. You do not know what she is, do you?" The question escaped before Grace could soften it. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "I have tracked that creature for 5 years." Grace looked at the mother wolf, then at the pups hiding beneath her. "And did you know she had babies?" Alexander's expression changed. Clearly, he had not. The largest pup peeked around its mother's front leg. One guard lowered his torch in disbelief. 3 of them. Alexander stared at the pups. Something complicated passed through his face. "We found tracks," he murmured. "Small ones. We thought they belonged to foxes." Grace remembered how deliberately the pups had led her here. They came to Silver Pine looking for help. Or bait. They were crying. Alexander looked at her as though compassion were the most dangerous argument she could have offered. "Miss Miller, people have disappeared near this forest. Did anyone actually see her take them?" Silence. Grace felt her heartbeat quicken. Alexander did not answer immediately. "We found her tracks near every disappearance." "Tracks are not proof." One guard shifted uneasily. Alexander's attention returned to the mother wolf. "You crossed a forbidden boundary based on 3 frightened pups and followed them nearly 2 miles into a forest where experienced trackers travel in groups." That sounds worse when you say it like that. To Grace's surprise, something almost amused flickered in his eyes before disappearing. Then the mother wolf suddenly moved. Every guard tensed, but she only stepped toward Grace. The smallest pup followed. Grace held her breath as the great white wolf stopped beside her and gently touched her shoulder with her muzzle. Alexander stared. She has never done that. Grace looked at him. Done what? Allowed anyone within 10 feet of her. The silver marking beneath the wolf's shoulder began to glow faintly. Alexander's face lost all trace of command. He took one slow step closer. "That mark," he whispered. Grace followed his gaze. "I thought it looked royal." Alexander did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the symbol, as though he had seen a ghost from his own past. Then he said a name Grace had never heard before. "Celeste." Alexander said the name again, softer this time. "Celeste." The white wolf lifted her head. Grace felt the change immediately. The animal that had watched the royal guards with guarded caution now stared directly at the Alpha King, her silver eyes filled with something Grace could not name. Recognition. Alexander took another step forward. "Your Majesty," one guard warned. Alexander raised a hand without looking back. "Stay where you are." Grace glanced between him and the wolf. "You know her?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "I knew someone with that mark." He pointed toward the faint silver crest beneath Celeste's shoulder. "Only royal guardians carry it." Grace looked at the enormous wolf beside her. "Then why have you been hunting her?" The question landed harder than she intended. Alexander did not become angry. Somehow, that made his answer more troubling. "Because I did not know it was her." He explained that Celeste had disappeared 5 years earlier while investigating strange activity around Black Hollow. Months later, travelers began vanishing near the forest, and an enormous white wolf was repeatedly seen near the same trails. Alexander had spent years believing the guardian and the beast were 2 separate mysteries. No one recognized her scent. Grace asked. "It changed," he said. "Whatever happened here changed almost everything about her." Celeste lowered herself beside the pups again, clearly exhausted. Grace crouched near her without touching her. "She needs rest." Alexander studied the scene. "And answers. In that order." One guard looked surprised that Grace had spoken to the king that way. Alexander merely exhaled. "You make obedience remarkably difficult, Miss Miller. I have been told that before." This time, she definitely saw the hint of a smile before his attention returned to Celeste. A horn sounded from farther east. Another search group. Celeste's ears flattened instantly. The 3 pups crowded against her. Grace noticed. "She is afraid of someone." Alexander's expression sharpened. "My guards." Grace shook her head. "Not all of them. Listen." More voices approached from beyond the ridge. Celeste remained calm until one particular voice carried through the trees. "Your Majesty, we found the trail." The reaction was immediate. Celeste rose despite her exhaustion and moved the pups behind Grace, her silver eyes fixed on the eastern path. Alexander noticed too. Who was that? Grace whispered. Counselor Marcus Reed, Alexander answered. A broad-shouldered man in a dark green traveling coat appeared between the trees with several pack trackers. His relieved expression lasted only until he saw Celeste. Then he stopped. Grace watched his face carefully. Surprise came first, then something else. Fear. Your Majesty, Marcus said. Step away from that creature. Alexander did not move. You recognize her? Marcus hesitated. Of course not. I recognize the beast from the reports. Celeste made a low warning sound, not advancing, only keeping herself between Marcus and the pups. Grace's wolf stirred with sudden certainty. Something was wrong. Marcus looked toward the three pups, and the color drained from his face. There are offspring? Alexander turned slowly toward him. You seem concerned. If the beast multiplied, the danger is greater than we believed. Grace stood. They are children, not a danger. Marcus barely looked at her. This is royal business, Omega. Alexander's voice cooled. She has a name. Marcus fell silent. Grace looked down as the smallest pup pressed against her leg. Around its neck, half hidden beneath pale fur, something caught the moonlight. A tiny silver pendant. Grace carefully lifted it. Alexander stared at the symbol engraved across its surface. It was not merely the Hayes royal crest. Beneath it were 3 letters. Alexander reached for the pendant but stopped before touching it. Where did that come from? Grace asked. His expression had changed completely. It belonged to my sister. Marcus took an involuntary step backward. Celeste immediately moved closer to the pups. Grace looked from the pendant to Alexander, then toward Marcus. The forest suddenly seemed to hold its breath. Whatever Celeste had been protecting for 5 years, Grace realized, it was not simply her 3 children. Alexander stared at the tiny pendant in Grace's hand, as though 5 years had suddenly collapsed into one moment. My sister, Evelyn, wore that every day, he said. Grace looked toward the 3 pups. Could one of them have found it? Not here. Alexander's voice was certain. Evelyn disappeared the same week Celeste did. Marcus Reed shifted near the eastern trail. Your Majesty, old jewelry proves nothing. The creature could have collected it anywhere. Grace noticed Celeste's eyes lock onto him again. The white wolf moved closer to the pups, placing herself between them and Marcus. She reacts differently to you, Grace said. Marcus gave her a dismissive look. You have known this animal for less than an hour, and she has spent that entire hour protecting those pups. Alexander turned toward Marcus. You were part of the investigation when Evelyn disappeared. Marcus hesitated. Half the council was. You personally led the search through Black Hollow. Because you ordered me to. The answer came too quickly. Grace felt her wolf stir. She looked down at the pendant again and noticed a narrow seam along its edge. This opens. Alexander stepped closer. It should not. Grace pressed her thumbnail against the seam. The pendant unfolded like a tiny locket. Inside was a miniature royal seal and a tightly rolled strip of pale material protected beneath crystal. Alexander's expression sharpened. Evelyn used those for confidential messages. Marcus took another step backward. We should return to the citadel before examining anything. Celeste made the same low warning sound. Alexander looked toward 2 guards. Counselor Reed stays here. Marcus froze. On what grounds? On mine. Alexander's tone ended the argument. Grace carefully handed him the pendant. He removed the tiny message and unfolded it beneath the torchlight. Only a few lines were written across it. As he read, his face became still. What does it say? Grace asked. Alexander looked toward Celeste. Evelyn discovered someone was using Black Hollow to hide people who had supposedly vanished from Pact territory. Grace remembered the stories. Missing travelers. Tracks blamed on the white beast. So Celeste was not taking them. No. Alexander's eyes moved to Marcus. She was finding them. Marcus shook his head. A 5-year-old message cannot tell you what happened afterward. There is more, Alexander said. His voice dropped. Evelyn wrote that if she failed to return, Celeste was to protect the witnesses until I could be trusted with the truth. Grace glanced at the pups. The witnesses? The smallest pup looked up at her, then walked toward the overhanging rock. The other 2 followed. Celeste did not stop them. Instead, she looked directly at Grace. She wants us to follow, Grace said. Alexander nodded. They moved behind the rock where Grace had first found Celeste. A narrow passage opened into a sheltered hollow hidden by cedar roots. Inside stood 3 small wooden boxes, carefully protected from rain. The pups each approached one. Grace knelt beside the nearest box. It contained letters, royal records, and several sealed council documents. Alexander opened the second. His expression hardened as he read the names written across the top page. Marcus was among them. "These are transfer orders," Alexander said. "People reported missing were secretly relocated beyond Silverpine under council authority." Grace looked at Marcus, and Celeste found the proof. Marcus's composure finally cracked. "You do not understand what was necessary to preserve order." Alexander stepped between him and the hollow. "Then you will explain it before the full council." Marcus glanced toward the forest as if calculating whether he could leave, but the royal guards quietly closed the path. No one threatened him. No one needed to. Grace turned toward Celeste. The great white wolf had lowered herself beside the pups again, exhaustion returning now that the secret was no longer hers alone to carry. Grace approached slowly. "You kept all of this safe for 5 years." Celeste touched her muzzle gently to Grace's hand. A faint silver light moved beneath the royal marking on her shoulder. Alexander saw it. His breath caught. Grace stepped back. She looked at him. "Why?" His eyes were fixed on the glowing crest. "Because that mark only responds when a royal guardian chooses someone worthy of her trust." Celeste rose, stepped directly beside Grace, and bowed her enormous white head. Celeste remained bowed before Grace, and for several seconds even the forest seemed silent. Grace looked helplessly at Alexander. "What am I supposed to do?" "Nothing," he said, his voice quieter than before. "A royal guardian chooses freely. Accepting her trust does not require a ceremony." Grace slowly placed her hand against Celeste's pale fur. The silver crest brightened beneath her fingers, then settled into a soft glow. The 3 pups gathered around Grace's boots as if the decision had included them too. Alexander stared at the sight with open disbelief. Marcus Reed broke the silence. "This changes nothing. She is an unranked Omega with no authority in royal affairs." Alexander turned toward him. "Tonight she found in 2 hours what my council concealed from me for 5 years. I suggest you reconsider which person here lacks authority." Marcus said nothing. Grace almost smiled, but Celeste suddenly swayed beside her. Grace caught herself against the wolf's shoulder. "She is exhausted." Alexander immediately called for the healer traveling with the second search group, but Celeste refused to move toward the approaching strangers. Her body became tense until Grace touched her again. "They are here to help," Grace whispered. Celeste slowly relaxed. The healer approached carefully and examined her from several feet away before explaining that she appeared severely weakened from years of isolation and caring for the pups, but she could recover with rest, food, and proper care. Grace released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Alexander ordered a sheltered camp established in the clearing until Celeste was strong enough to travel safely. Then he instructed 2 trusted guards to secure the records from the hidden hollow. Marcus watched every order with growing unease. "Your Majesty, taking those documents without council review violates procedure." Alexander looked at him. "They are evidence involving members of that same council. Procedure will survive the inconvenience." Grace noticed the smallest pup wandering toward Marcus. Before it came within 10 feet of him, Celeste rose and called it back with a soft sound. The pup immediately returned. Alexander noticed too. "She still does not trust him." "Neither do I," Grace said. Marcus gave her a cold look. "Your instincts are not evidence." Grace glanced toward the wooden boxes. "Fortunately, those are." Alexander almost smiled. The eastern sky had begun turning gray when the guards finished cataloging the records. Grace sat beside Celeste beneath the overhanging rock while the pups slept curled together near their mother's side. Alexander approached carrying 2 cups of warm tea and offered one to Grace. "You crossed a forbidden boundary, ignored a royal warning, entered the most dangerous forest in my territory alone, and somehow uncovered a conspiracy before breakfast." Grace accepted the cup. "When you describe it that way, I sound irresponsible." "You were irresponsible." She looked at him. "That was surprisingly honest." "I am still the man responsible for keeping you alive." His expression softened. "But you were also right." Grace looked toward Celeste. "About her." about asking whether anyone had actually seen her take the missing people. Alexander sat on a nearby stone, leaving a respectful distance between them. For years, I hunted signs instead of questioning the story built around them. Grace studied him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because my sister vanished, and grief makes certainty feel safer than doubt. The answer changed something in Grace's understanding of him. The feared Alpha King had not spent 5 years chasing a monster because he enjoyed the hunt. He had been searching for an explanation. Do you think Evelyn is alive? Grace asked. Alexander looked toward the sealed records. I do not know. Celeste suddenly lifted her head. At the sound of Evelyn's name, her ears turned toward Alexander. Then she looked at the 3 sleeping pups. One by one, they woke. The largest pup walked toward Alexander for the first time and placed one small paw on his boot. Alexander froze. The pup looked back at Celeste. Grace saw the mother wolf's silver crest glow again. This time, matching silver symbols appeared faintly beneath the fur of all 3 pups. Alexander stared at them, recognition slowly replacing confusion. Those are not guardian marks, he whispered. Grace looked at him. Then what are they? Alexander's voice nearly disappeared. They are marks of the Hayes bloodline. Alexander did not move for several seconds. The largest pup kept one small paw against his boot, while the silver mark beneath its pale fur shimmered in the growing dawn. Grace watched the Alpha King's expression change from disbelief to something far more vulnerable. Hayes bloodline, she asked softly. Alexander crouched until he was level with the pup. Every child born directly into my family carries that mark until their first shift. His gaze moved toward the other 2 pups. The same symbol glowed faintly on each of them. There have been no royal children born in 5 years. Grace looked toward Celeste. The great white wolf watched Alexander carefully. Except these 3. Marcus Reed immediately stepped forward. That is impossible. Royal marks can be forged by old magic. Alexander rose. You seem remarkably prepared with explanations this morning, Marcus. The counselor stopped. Grace noticed Celeste watching the hidden hollow again. There may be something else in those records. Alexander ordered one of his trusted guards to bring the smallest wooden box. Inside were sealed letters, an old royal registry, and a narrow leather journal marked with the initials Evelyn Hayes. Alexander's hands went still. Her journal. Grace remained beside Celeste while he opened it. Several pages had faded with age, but the final entries were readable. Alexander scanned them silently until his breathing changed. Evelyn discovered the secret transfers months before she disappeared, he said. She believed someone inside the council was removing witnesses who could expose illegal land seizures along the northern territories. Marcus looked toward the forest. The guards quietly remained between him and the trail. Alexander continued reading. She asked Celeste to help her gather evidence. Grace looked at the pups. And them. Alexander turned another page. His face softened. Evelyn was expecting children. Grace's breath caught. 3. He nodded. The smallest pup moved closer to him. Alexander slowly offered his hand. After a moment, the pup touched its nose to his fingers. His eyes closed briefly. They are my sisters. Grace looked at Celeste. Then she is not their mother. Alexander followed her gaze. Not by blood. The truth suddenly became more powerful than the story everyone had believed. Celeste had not hidden in Black Hollow protecting her own offspring. She had spent 5 years protecting someone else's children. Grace crouched beside her. You stayed for them. Celeste gently touched Grace's shoulder with her muzzle. Alexander turned another page. Evelyn wrote that if she could not return, Celeste was to keep the pups hidden until someone approached them with compassion instead of authority. Grace blinked. Why? Alexander read the next line twice before answering. Because the royal guardian bond recognizes intention. Celeste would know who could be trusted. Marcus laughed nervously. You cannot seriously suggest this Omega was somehow selected by a 5-year-old plan. Alexander closed the journal. I am suggesting my sister understood Celeste better than any of us did. He faced Marcus. And I am suggesting you knew those pups existed. Marcus's expression finally broke. You cannot prove that. A small voice answered from behind Grace. He can. Everyone froze. Grace turned. The largest pup stood within a circle of pale silver light. Its form shifted gently, the glow bright enough to obscure the transformation without revealing anything inappropriate. When the light faded, A young boy of about 6 stood wrapped in an oversized guard cloak someone immediately placed around his shoulders. His silver-gray eyes were unmistakably haze. Alexander stared at him. The child looked frightened, but Celeste moved beside him and Grace offered her hand. He took it. "My name is Noah," he whispered. Alexander lowered himself slowly to one knee. "Noah, I am Alexander." The boy studied his face. "I know. Celeste showed us your picture." Alexander's eyes filled with emotion. "Did Evelyn tell you who I am?" Noah nodded. "She said you were our uncle." Silence swept through the clearing. Marcus took one slow step backward. Noah noticed. His fingers tightened around Grace's hand. Then he looked directly at Alexander. "That is the man Celeste kept us hidden from." Noah's words changed the clearing. The guards turned toward Marcus, but Alexander lifted one hand before anyone moved. His voice remained calm. "No one frightens the children." Grace felt Noah relax slightly beside her. Marcus looked from the boy to Alexander. "Your Majesty, he is 6 years old. He cannot understand what he is saying." Noah's fingers tightened around Grace's hand. "I remember him." Celeste stepped beside the boy, her silver eyes fixed on Marcus. Alexander crouched again. "You do not have to tell us anything you do not want to tell us, Noah." The child looked toward Celeste before answering. "He came here before. A long time ago. Celeste always made us hide when she smelled him." Marcus shook his head. "That proves nothing." Alexander rose. "Perhaps not by itself." He held Evelyn's journal in one hand. "But the records, transfer orders, my sister's message, and your name appearing throughout them deserve an independent inquiry." Marcus's confidence faded. "I served this kingdom for 20 years. Then you should welcome the chance to explain your actions." Alexander motioned to 2 trusted guards. "Escort Counselor Reed back to Silver Pine. He is to remain under supervised royal custody until the evidence is reviewed." Marcus looked ready to protest, then noticed every person in the clearing watching him. He finally lowered his head and left peacefully between the guards. Only when his footsteps disappeared did Celeste relax. Grace exhaled. She knew. Alexander looked at the royal guardian. "For 5 years, she knew who threatened them while I was hunting her." Regret darkened his expression. Grace understood why, but she would not let him turn it into punishment. "You were following the evidence you had. Evidence someone arranged for me to find. Then change what happens next." Alexander looked at her. The words seemed to settle somewhere deep. He nodded. "I will." Behind them, silver light surrounded the other 2 pups. Grace turned as their wolf forms gently shifted beneath the glow. When it faded, 2 children stood wrapped immediately in warm cloaks brought by the guards, a girl and a younger boy, both with the same silver-gray haze eyes as Noah. They stayed close to Celeste. Alexander looked overwhelmed. "Do they have names?" Noah nodded. "Lily and Benjamin." Alexander repeated each name as though committing them to his heart. Grace felt her throat tighten. 5 years of rumors had called Celeste a beast. 5 years of stories had blamed her for disappearances. Yet she had been raising 3 royal children in silence while guarding evidence that could clear the innocent. Alexander approached Celeste slowly. "I owe you more than an apology." Celeste watched him. "I hunted you because I believed you had taken people from my territory." His voice softened. "You were protecting the people my own council had abandoned." Celeste stepped forward and rested her great white head briefly against his shoulder. Alexander closed his eyes. Grace looked away, giving them the privacy of the moment. When she turned back, Celeste had moved toward her instead. The royal guardian lowered her head before Grace once more. Noah smiled. "She likes you." Grace smiled faintly. "I noticed." Alexander came to stand several feet away. "It is more than that." The silver crest on Celeste's shoulder brightened, and Grace felt her quiet wolf awaken with unexpected warmth. Alexander's expression changed at the same instant. His wolf had sensed it too. "What is happening?" Grace asked. "The guardian is recognizing you before the royal bloodline," Alexander said. "That has not happened in generations." Grace looked around the clearing. "I only followed 3 crying pups." "Exactly." Alexander's gaze softened. "You entered a forest everyone feared because 3 children needed help. You approached someone everyone called a monster because she looked tired instead of dangerous. You questioned a story my entire kingdom accepted." Grace felt suddenly self-conscious. "I also ignored a royal law. We will discuss your talent for that later." She laughed despite herself. Then Celeste touched Grace's hand with her muzzle. Silver light traveled briefly across Grace's wrist. A second glow answered beneath Alexander's skin. Both of them froze. Celeste looked between them, almost knowingly. Grace's wolf whispered a word she had never heard from her before. Mate, mate. The words settled inside Grace with quiet certainty, yet she did not move. Across from her, Alexander stared at the silver light beneath his wrist, then at the matching glow on hers. For a man who commanded an entire kingdom, he suddenly looked completely unprepared. You heard it too, Grace said. Alexander gave a slow nod. My wolf was considerably less subtle. A nervous laugh escaped her. The tension in the clearing softened, but Alexander did not approach. Instead, he gave her the same respectful distance he had offered Celeste. Grace, a bond does not make decisions for us. She searched his face. You are not going to announce something dramatic? I was considering it. His mouth almost curved into a smile. Then I remembered you crossed into a forbidden forest because someone told you not to. Grace folded her arms. That is not why I crossed. I know. His expression softened. You crossed because 3 frightened children needed someone to follow them. Nearby, Noah, Lily, and Benjamin sat beside Celeste beneath the cedar trees while the healer prepared them for the journey back to Silverpine. The sight changed the meaning of Black Hollow completely. It had never been the home of a monster. It had been a refuge. Alexander looked toward the children. When we return, the kingdom will hear the truth. Celeste's name will be restored. The missing families will be located through those records, and every council order connected to Marcus will be reviewed independently. Grace nodded. And the forest? The prohibition ends when it is safe. Black Hollow will become protected royal land. Celeste lifted her head as though she understood. Alexander stepped toward her and bowed. The Alpha King bowed to the creature he had hunted for 5 years. I cannot return what my mistake cost you, he said quietly. But I can make certain no one calls you a beast again. Celeste touched her muzzle gently to his shoulder. Grace felt something inside her loosen. This was the strength she had always hoped powerful people could possess, not the refusal to be wrong, but the courage to admit it. As morning sunlight reached the clearing, the group began the journey towards Silverpine. Noah held Alexander's hand. Lily walked beside Celeste. Benjamin stayed close to Grace, asking approximately one question every 10 seconds. By the time the forest boundary appeared, dozens of pack members had gathered beyond the marker. The same people who had laughed at Grace the evening before now fell silent as she emerged from Black Hollow beside 3 royal children and the legendary White Guardian. Alexander stepped forward. For 5 years, we were taught to fear what lived beyond this boundary. We were wrong. His voice carried across the crowd. Celeste Hayes was never our enemy. She protected my sister's children and preserved evidence of crimes committed under royal authority. Shock moved through the pack. Grace remained near the children until Alexander turned toward her. And Grace Miller entered this forest when every rule told her to walk away. Whispers began. Rejected Omega. Grace heard the familiar words, but they no longer hurt the same way. Alexander continued. She did not save them because she possessed rank. She saved them because she listened when everyone else had stopped listening. Celeste walked through the crowd and stopped beside Grace. Then the royal guardian bowed her head. The entire gathering became silent. One by one, the royal guards followed her example, lowering their heads toward Grace. Alexander did not ask Grace to kneel before him. Instead, he stepped down from the raised boundary stone until they stood on equal ground. The silver mark beneath his wrist appeared again. Grace's answered. The bond chose us, he said softly, only for her. But what happens next is ours to choose. Grace looked at the 3 children, at Celeste, and finally at the Alpha King who had learned to question his own certainty. She placed her hand in his. Then we start slowly. Alexander smiled. Slowly sounds wise. Behind them, Black Hollow glowed beneath the morning sun, no longer forbidden, no longer defined by fear. Grace had entered it as the Omega everyone overlooked. She returned with a royal guardian at her side, 3 lost children safely home, and a king willing to walk beside her rather than ahead of her. Her gentleness had never been the absence of strength. It had simply been strength that knew what was worth protecting.